Hi there, and welcome to the channel of A Disappointed Man with me, Jason Kennedy, the Disappointed Man. Only this time I'm not so disappointed because I've been very much encouraged by the positive response to my last two videos, the one on Denton Welsh and the one on Thomas Bernhard, each of which has received praise from noted booktubers. So I wish to thank the Rambling Raconteur and Leaf by Leaf for their generous comments and for welcoming me to the BookTube community. So the subject of today's talk is going to be this book, Arthur Conan Doyle, The Lost World, his 1912 novel. Now, I'm going to take it that everyone viewing this is familiar with the basic action of the lost world, which is the discovery that far from being extinct, there are dinosaurs still living on a isolated South American plateau. Something which, at the time that Conan Doyle was writing this, there was still a belief that this was possible, and there is a rock, I think it may be situated in Venezuela or Colombia, that was identified as a possible elevated plateau where one might find prehistoric creatures still living. So there was a kind of not a germ of truth, but there was a strand of thought which was prepared to seriously entertain the conceit of this tale. Now, in terms of its genre, The Lost World belongs to the genre of the imperial romance, or it's sometimes called the scientific romance, and it's a very late example, and it could be seen as bringing to a close its useful life, because 2 years later the Great War will break out, and the imperial romance will give way to the spy story, and so you'll start to get those wonderful John Buchan tales emerging. So because it's a late example, The Lost World is able to look backwards at the genre's history, and so its characters are sort of montages or collages of previous characters that are familiar from the genre. So Lord John, for example, despite perhaps having a real-life counterpart in Sir Roger Casement, who's a very close friend of Conan Doyle and was executed as a traitor, he also has fictional antecedents. So the aristocratic character that Haggard deploys in King Solomon's Mines and some of his other Quatermain tales could also be seen as a model for Lord John. However, as I will come on to, there is one or two, I should say, originals in this imperial romance. So there are two additions to the genre. But before I come on to them, they will form part of this binary relationship that I want to talk about, which is kind of at the heart of the Lost World, and it centers on the action of the Lost World, which is basically all about establishing the truth of Challenger's claim that these dinosaurs are not extinct and they still exist. And so this is an extraordinary claim, and what this claim brings into play is a conflict between speech and writing. Now, one critic, the closest one to my reading, was is a woman called Amy Wong, and she set up a conflict between truth and imagination. So Challenger represents truth, and Malone, the reporter, represents imagination. Whereas I'm going to say that it's actually speech versus writing is better. So, why, first of all, is there any kind of issue over the relationship between speech and writing to truth? Don't they both stand an equal distance from truth? Well, not so. Not so, because Challenger embodies this view, which I've got here, a very fancy phrase from Jacques Derrida, which is the metaphysics of presence. Okay, and this goes all the way back to Plato. So yes, Challenger is kind of exemplifying like a kind of position that is found in Plato, and that is that speech and writing actually stand in opposition to one another, because speech, I have here a nice quote, being intimately linked to presence or to origin is deemed to be original, whereas writing is deemed to be derived. Writing is never self-standing, but depends on the speech that preceded it, which it copies. It's from a chap called Pimentel there. That is the link. Speech is the link. This idea of speech being original between the characters, because Challenger is an addition to the Imperial Romance because he is an original, whereas everyone else, with one exception, in the Lost World, is a copy. Now, who is the other original? It's Maple White, who is dead when the novel begins, and it is Maple White's artistic materials that are discovered by Challenger, and which lead him to the sightings of dinosaurs. And one thing that is notable in the text that supports my contention here is that Challenger disparages everyone. Everyone in this novel is the subject of his kind of criticism and dismissal. And he speaks of living in a half-educated age. He refers to Ned as subhuman. But there is just one figure in this novel who has his respect, his unconditional respect, and that is Maple White, because Maple White observed the truth and recorded it in his journal. So he notes that Maple White's name will stand equal with his own when it comes to this discovery entering the kind of the annals of human history. So that is very interesting there. So because Challenger is an original and feels that speech takes precedence over language, this is why he's having such a struggle in the Edwardian society to which he belongs, because print culture and mass literacy are producing a situation where what is printed in newspapers is taken as the truth. So when Challenger returns from his first doomed expedition to South America, where despite the triumph of having seen the dinosaurs and even collected some pieces of physical evidence, when he arrives back in London and tries to impart news of his thrilling discovery, he is subjected to endless mockery, and the newspapers caricature him. So he becomes a figure of fun for those who haven't even encountered him. And this is noted when Malone goes to his gentleman's club. I think it's called the Savage Club. It is the Savage Club. My memory doesn't fail me. And he meets there Tarb Henry, who's a bacteriologist, so a scientist. So you would expect, when it comes to matters of the truth, he would adopt the principles of scientific rigor. Not so. Without having met Challenger, without having examined his physical evidence for himself, he dismisses Challenger as a crank. Why? Because he's being seduced and has taken his view from the newspapers reporting of Challenger. So it shows that it's not a split between the scientific community who are objective and the public, that scientists themselves are also prey to the same kind of suggestibility from the mass media. And again, when Ned Malone speaks with McArdle, there's a great scene at the newspaper where you see the way the news is manufactured, and you see that both men kind of take pleasure in the fact that they fabricate or embellish the details of the events they report in order to make them more satisfying for the reader. But what you also see is when they're discussing Challenger, that an echo chamber is set up, and Malone and McArdle, their claims regarding Challenger's personality escalate with no basis whatsoever other than this kind of circuit that is being completed. So they go from kind of expressing reservations about his scientific credentials to denouncing him as a homicidal megalomaniac on no grounds whatever. So they are also, they're purveyors of untruths, but they also believe these untruths themselves. They're very suggestible themselves. So if Challenger is an original, then Malone, who is the reporter on the side of writing, embodies this the copy, and the idea of newspapers as well, which we speak of as copies. How many copies of a newspaper have been sold? So this is why Malone doesn't know who he is. He's struggling for identity at the start. So Malone's having this identity crisis, and he goes to see his beloved Gladys Hungerton, who's got a very unromantic name, and it's actually Ned that entertains romantic notions of going on adventures, and Gladys also feeds these because she suggests that the man she's in love with is this kind of an ideal, and that Ned needs to model himself on this ideal, and Ned agrees. So you get this copy of a copy of a copy that will establish Ned in the world and sort of enter him into the ranks of those adults who command respect. And of course, in the novel, the way it unfolds is Ned finds his model, and that is Lord John, the aristocratic man of adventure, and this relationship closes with this kind of very homosocial moment where the brown hand of Lord John and Ned's hand clasp one another, and Ned forswears women and marriage and instead dedicates himself to a life of adventure. That will come later. Okay, so that is at the novel's close. So in some of the readings of this novel, they kind of miss how this speech and writing opposition is not just something that occurs in the lost world, where there's this kind of epistemological crisis regarding writing and how to establish the truth. But it's kind of there, like I said, even before the tale begins, in Challenger's libel action and his effort to restrain publication, and it's also kind of present in the early scenes. If we move on, the other member of the party that we need to speak about is the Professor Summerlee, who Challenger is also at odds with. So Challenger is at odds with the newspaper men, represented by Malone, and also those who you would think would perhaps be his allies in the academy. But no, because what Summerlee represents is this dusty scholasticism. So for Summerlee, the way to refute Challenger's claims is to cite authorities that he feels have more professional repute than Challenger. And what this misses is that this authority rests ultimately upon observation. That's what it should rest upon in Challenger's view. So Challenger's notion that if you want to know what is true, you must go and observe it with your own senses. And this was the motivation for his initial quest. He actually went to Latin America to retrace the route of these other noted scientists and to check their observations against his own. That to him is the true scientific method. It takes place in the field, whereas Summerlee, as we will see, is the bookish character who stands in the way of Challenger's observations being accepted. So there's this kind of inductive fallacy we see in Summerlee. If 1,000 observations have been recorded, he forms a kind of general law from these that can be used to refute the 1001st observation, which challenges them. And the kind of mistake here is that although you could take a kind of a positive observation and use that to form a negative kind of rule, so you could observe that a plant is only found, in the proximity of water, and then you could form the kind of the negatives, that this plant will not be found where there isn't a source of water. What he does is he doesn't work backwards from this kind of positive observation. He just says, because no living dinosaurs have been observed up to now, then that means if someone has observed one, then it cannot be a valid observation. Whereas Challenger, is the kind of deadly opposed to such a view. So I will now turn to what set me off onto my interest in speech and writing here. And what really made me wonder about what was going on with the two was this incident that happens when the party arrive in Latin America. And what's happened is, on the voyage out, Challenger has dispatched Malone, Lord John, and Summerlee as a trio, and he's kind of suggested that he will be staying in England and that they will undertake the trip themselves, and he will give them written instructions which they will use, and then they will return to England. And if they found the living dinosaurs, found the proof, then that will be conclusive. But in fact, what Challenger does is he stows himself away on the ship, and he keeps out of sight of the other three, and he's kind of trying to time his arrival to fit with the instructions that he's given them. So what it was is he tells them that my directions for your instructions and guidance are in this sealed envelope, upon the outside of which is printed a date and a time for which it should be opened at a hotel in Manaus. So this is in South America, a town upon the Amazon. So when the trio finally arrived there, they open up the envelope, and what they find inside is this blank sheet of paper. And this is what set me off, because I found this so intriguing, that it was just this empty sheet of paper, and it really kind of alerted me even more to the role of writing and Challenger's deep aversion to writing in this story. And what was also really interesting there, and we'll come on to it, is that the characters, Lord John, Summerlee, and Malone, all react to this blank piece of paper as if it is not blank. It's treated effectively as a text. And that was also kind of charming, the way that happened, because it reveals their kind of dispositions with regards to the truth. So what Malone does is he says, oh, maybe there's invisible ink, there's a message written in urine there that will only be revealed by heating the paper or holding it up to a light source, and of course there isn't. And then somebody says, well, this is proof. He's a humbug, he's an imposter, and our trip is already at an end. And then Lord John, who's the closest character to Challenger, because his store of knowledge is all drawn directly from his adventures. This is one of the reasons why, like Challenger, he knows how varied the terrain is. He knows how little of the world has truly been explored, how many dark regions remain. And that is one of the reasons why he will entertain seriously the idea that there could be dinosaurs. It's possible to him because experience has taught him that there are many strange phenomena out there that you would not credit the existence of sat in your armchair in a London's gentleman's club. Okay, so Lord John takes the view that there's simply nothing there, which of course is the truth. And pointing to the speech writing kind of dichotomy is that Challenger has tried to time his arrival to be just before they open the envelope, when he will announce his presence in spectacular fashion. He's in a disguise, but his voice will reveal his identity, and he gets delayed. Conan Doyle, whereas in the Sherlock Holmes adventures, he will contrive the action in order for Holmes to demonstrate his mastery of circumstance. In the Lost World, Conan Doyle deliberately places obstacles in Challenger's way to have fun with him. That's why there's something so joyous about the mishaps and the bumblings and the indignities that Challenger is subjected to throughout this novel. And what you find here is Challenger has been delayed by a boatman, and so he doesn't quite arrive. He arrives after they've opened the envelope, and his words are, "May I come in," are his words. And it's this "May I come in" signals his entrance not just into the room, but into the action. And then from this point on, there's this epistemological crisis intensifies between speech on the top and writing underneath, because Ned and Summerlee have the view that writing should be placed above. Logocentrism, in the words of Derrida, and Challenger, as I said, emphasizes the phonocentric, speech on the top. And what you find is, in the terrain of the Lost World, the crisis is that writing begins to lose its authority, and its ability to convince others of its truth is severely challenged as it moves a greater and greater distance away from the metropolitan centre. And so what Ned agonizes over, and this kind of emphasizes this crisis, is the figure of Munchausen. Because Munchausen is, and you might know from the Baron Munchausen, the Terry Gilliam film, is his writings are a byword for writing which contains claims which are so incredible that instead of convince the audience of their potential to be true, instead it completely undermines your audience belief in the messenger. And so Ned begins to fear that his dispatches to London, as they enter deeper and deeper into the Lost World, are just going to be ridiculed, and that he will return not to a hero's welcome, but to the baying crowd, ready to subject him to the same kind of ridicule and mockery which he has himself manufactured against Challenger. And Challenger rejoices in this, and he says, "You're going to meet the same fate as myself." That's what happens to adventurers such as us. You will not be believed. But of course, this is not what happens. And for this, the work of the Lost World to be accomplished, speech and writing must come together and must complement one another, so that a successful conclusion can be reached. So the action on the Lost World is all centered around how writing and speech can be reconciled. And there are some interesting incidents of how this happens. One concerns the escape attempt, because here you see that speech fails, because Challenger's dream, because of the way he dominates by presence, by his voice, has always been to have a very receptive and obedient audience, or even a kind of society of some kind at his command. And it's in the Lost World, because Challenger is this throwback to earlier kinds of dominance that are exemplified by the ape men, these very savage creatures from prehistory, these illiterates, who their chief dominates in this fashion. He shouts down everyone else and overpowers them with his physicality. And one of the joys of the Lost World is how Challenger so closely resembles the leader of the ape men. And there's this moment where the Challenger's being disrobed, or he's kind of in rags because he's been dragged around by the ape men. So they stand, with the savage here and Challenger, and they're indistinguishable. They look like brothers, and that is one of the most glorious moments in the Lost World, that this undeniable similarity emerges. But the play with speech here, in terms of the escape, is that Challenger is able to command the women of this society, not the 8 men actually, but the other group who are slightly more civilized. But he's able to command them to produce this ridiculous balloon for a kind of Jules Verne balloon style escape. And of course, when it's finished, it just goes, takes off, almost lifts the party up on its rope, and kind of kills them. And what that suggests here is that unrestrained speech, speech that is just sort of obeyed without question, even if it's sort of aligned along scientific principles, can also be disastrous. And the way writing kind of reasserts itself here is that it's Ned who uses speech not to command, but in its social function, to interact, to extract information in the way a good reporter would. Is able to secure a map from the locals that will lead them out through a kind of secret passage back to the ground and back, as it were, the kind of civilization. Now, the way when they leave the lost world that speech and writing work together is very interesting, because it centers on the voyage home. And what happens is Ned agrees with Challenger to conceal in his dispatches the presence of the live baby pterodactyl, who they're going to take back to London and present to the people there. And so what I would suggest is, look at my notes, what I suggest there is that there's a parallel with the envelope with nothing in it, and the box with the pterodactyl in it, because the envelope is pure absence, the blank page inside the envelope, but the box is pure presence, but it's also concealed. And so when they arrive back, McArdle, the editor, who's been dealing with Malone's reports in London, has kind of skillfully managed them in such a way that rather than be a Munchausen, Malone and the party, their claims have been accepted, and so they're returning to this hero's welcome. But there will still be this problem of how will they convince people. And what's interesting in terms of how people have to be convinced is, once again, at the conclusion of The Lost World, we see that Challenger is correct. Only direct observation can truly convince people, and this is played to in the meeting at the Zoological Institute, where Challenger says to the audience, and who are completely unaware that there's a pterodactyl about to be released, he says, "I can exhibit to you from my portfolio a picture of the creature taken from life which would convince you," and Dr. Illingworth interrupts, "No picture could convince us of anything." Professor Challenger, "You would require to see the thing itself?" Dr. Illingworth, "Undoubtedly." Professor Challenger, "And you would accept that?" Dr. Illingworth, laughing, "Beyond a doubt." "Well, here it is. Here it is, and the audience are convinced at a stroke. No writing is required. Actually, no speech is required. You look with your eyes, you observe, and you know. Okay? So, that is kind of what I would say in terms of the kind of conflict there between speech and writing. And I hope that's stimulated you to go back and read this great tale and kind of look at them, those examples for yourself. Oh, and if I needed to add just one little incident as a bonus at the end, this is why I just think Conan Doyle was very aware himself that he was setting up this opposition, and that is if you look at the fight that precedes Challenger and Ned becoming friends. When they fight, they bowl over one another and they tumble outside down a flight of steps, and a policeman is passing and he observes the incident. Observes, right? And what does he take out? His notebook. And what does he refer to? A previous incident with Challenger, a copy, right? And he begins to write his report in his notebook, and Ned relents from making a complaint and says, "No, please, You know, don't write anything. So it's at this moment when the policeman snaps shut the notebook and Ned averts an act of writing, which Challenger has also the aversion to. That the two men's friendship begins with a look, you know, an observation in the eyes of each man, and they return inside and their relationship begins in earnest with a completely different kind of conversation. Yeah, so much artistry in this novel, and so I don't think I'm kind of imposing my reading on this text, more like trying to draw out something that was there. And the rain is really intensifying, so I will stop now, and I hope that, as I say, you found this interesting, and until the next time, take care, and I will see you anon. Nanu nanu.